certificate this morning in my local stream, and I had to go back and back and back, and I'm scrolling through all pictures of you, and I'm oh, it's like a trip down memory lane.
Now I'm not live.
What's up?
Yeah, I just de-lived myself.
I'm just going to get all the candidates.
Mike. Hey, I appreciate you coming out for this.
My pleasure. Thanks for doing it. Thanks for having us. And you filled the room.
Yeah, no, a lot of very engaged folks here.
Do you have a seating order or?
I think. Hey, Andy. Yeah, he's the. Hey, Kathleen, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
You're out of sign first.
Oh, yeah, I know. That's what I was asking Andy.
We have mics assigned to certain seats, but we're.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. If you're still filing in, you can find a seat. There's more seats here closer to the other side and in the back. We want to thank everyone for attending, and I'm going to kick it off, send it to County Executive Chris Abley for some opening remarks.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for being here as well. I and who you'll see on stage, because as you don't need me to tell you, making the commitment to run for public office is just about as frustrating and thankless in some moments as it's ever been. And so your willingness to persevere because you care and you want to make a difference is something I want to make sure we note, and I don't take for granted. So just a little word about where we are right now. With another hat, I have a venture fund, and this is a co-location space here, Ward 4. There's all sorts of businesses that are growing here. My fund, we invest in startup and seed companies that are either in Wisconsin or they're not in Wisconsin, and we bring them here to grow jobs here. We are on a national average of women and minority-owned companies for venture funds. I'll bet you all know the number's pretty low. It's way too low. Women-owned companies, about 3%. I'm proud to say our fund is well over 60, I think around 62%. But more importantly, now ask how we're doing. Really well. The company that's growing here is hiring qualified that we have the opportunity to improve on. So broadly, here's the issue that we're going to be focusing on. You may have seen some of the charts on the way in here about how our state funds local government. This is an issue not unique just to Milwaukee County. It applies to local government around the state. The Wisconsin Policy Forum, which has been doing amazing work for over 100 years now, did a great report recently where they pointed out that Wisconsin is unique in the United States in that we are the only state that doesn't have some mechanism for ensuring that when economic development happens locally, which is how state budgets grow, it doesn't ensure that we are able locally to keep some set percentage of that number. So what's happened is, generally speaking, every year, every 2 years, the state biennial budget goes up. What we all send to the state goes up. What comes back to local government is flat or down. So a few examples locally in Milwaukee County, between 2007 and 2015, if you live in Milwaukee County, we have sent right now more than $250 million more every year to the state. So we're probably getting a lot more back from the state, right? No. So some example, the way we've maintained fares as low as we have is by putting in more local tax levy. Our Child Support Services Department, that's what counties operate around the state. We have similarly a funding level from the state that was also set in the Doyle administration. And I know as a group of Democrats, there is nobody here who doesn't understand the importance of ensuring that every single parent who deserves it is getting, with kids, that check every month. It's important. The caseload now in Milwaukee for our department is 900 people per caseworker. And if that sounds like a lot, that is tied, it's number 1 or number 2 in the country. We've been able to do a lot of good work, but I say this to give examples of the real impacts of this funding issue. It isn't us versus the state. It's a result of decisions probably 45 years ago, and I doubt anyone intended or even anticipated that this is what would happen. But this is an issue that every county in the state has an interest in solving, and so does the state. Again, economic growth happens when we create new jobs locally. So we're only able to do that locally if we are able to provide the infrastructure, the schools, the roads to support it. And if we can't do it, we're missing out. It's never been more important for the state to get this right. And the reason we've chosen this subject for today is it's a little wonky and it's kind of hard to get people to pay attention sometimes because nothing's blowing up and it's not as scandalous sounding. But it is crucially important. So all the candidates here have been given all the questions ahead of time and the rules, but essentially each candidate will get a 2-minute opening statement. Each candidate, after we do a few show of hands questions, has a minute 30 to respond to questions. We have a timekeeper, Tia, here in front, who has the standard timekeeper duty of holding up the sign and trying to get people to pay attention to it on your limits, but I know we have a very well-behaved and civil group. That's right. So, we're going to start with a few show of hands statements to set a baseline. So to the candidates, I'd like to ask you to raise your hand if you agree with these statements.
The only engine?
No.
I would say the most powerful.
Yes. There you go. Excellent point. And Paul has reminded me, yeah, right, 2-minute open statement first. Apologies. So, Paul.
Start?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Thank you. When I took office for the first time in Madison, the value of all real estate in the city of Milwaukee was 3 times the value of all real estate in the city of Madison. And keep in mind, because of the university and the state, a lot of property in Madison is tax exempt. Now the difference between the two is virtually 0. That Madison has caught up. That property tax is the only really viable source of revenue that we have. And whether you want to make it blame or you want to make it responsibility, it goes back to the Lafollets. And the concept was, let's minimally collect taxes at the local level for municipalities and counties and school districts, and let's collect all the funds at the state and redistribute them based on need to the various communities around Wisconsin. Over the last 30 years, that system has been perverted. And what has happened is the state has kept a larger and larger share for itself, and the formula, which is based on population and the wrong measurement of poverty, namely real estate values, has been frozen, therefore resulting in the dismal situation we have today in Wisconsin. The last time we were all here, we were at a candidates forum and we were asked by one of the moderators, and the preface to the question was, since the most important responsibility for the governor is economic development, and then the question went on. Economic development does not occur by focusing on businesses. That's the key. The key is creating a great place and focusing on 5 areas. Those 5 areas we'll talk about are affordable housing, transportation, quality child care, health care, and education, not for careers, but to teach people how to think.
All right. Tony.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tony Evers, Democratic candidate for governor, and thanks for being here today. Just want a quick background for me. I'm from Plymouth, Wisconsin. I met my wife, Kathy, in kindergarten there. Our first date was junior prom. All that is true. I'm not making that up. I've been an educator my entire life. I started my career as a teacher and a principal and a superintendent of schools at various school districts across the state of Wisconsin. And then, of course, I'm presently state superintendent, and I've won 3 times statewide. The last time was 70% of the vote, and I won 70 of 72 counties. This race is absolutely critical, and I'll talk a little bit about Milwaukee and my experience here. As state superintendent, I have been in Milwaukee Public Schools, individual schools, more than any other district in the state. We work hard with our school district here to make the changes necessary. Funding clearly isn't an example, but we continue to struggle and work with them on these issues. It's critically important. And what I believe in my heart is that what's best for our kids is best for our state and best for our state's economy. We start with K through 12. We have to have a world-class system. We also have to have a world-class system in the University of Wisconsin system and the technical college system. That's where our economic engine is. It's absolutely important. Thirdly, we have to have a good transportation system, and I can tell you that Scott Walker has failed miserably in that, whether it's mass transit, whether it's other types of roads and internet. All those infrastructure things have failed. We must have that in order to have a good state of Wisconsin. We also need to protect our natural resources and create good jobs. I believe that we are in the position to not only take out Scott Walker, but to make these changes. I have leads in the poll, 25 points over the Democrats in the primary, and also a recent NBC poll has me 13 points against Scott Walker.
Stop.
Kathleen?
I can barely get it out of my mouth.
Hello, I'm State Senator Kathleen Vinehout. I represent a large rural district in western Wisconsin. I've been in the Senate for the last 12 years. Wherever I go around the state, I see and hear stories of people who are hurting. And we're hurting in Wisconsin because wages are 18th worst of any state in the union, lower than Tennessee and Georgia, than Louisiana and Missouri. I have a very different vision of where the direction is the state is headed now. I'm running for governor to put people first, people at the center of state government when it comes to budget priorities, at the top of the list when it comes to spending. And that includes things like free tuition for two-year and tech colleges, $100 million in needs-based financial aid, and refinancing student debt, affordable health care, creating a Badger-based healthcare marketplace to keep costs down, taking the Medicaid expansion money and using the cash that's freed up in state government to invest in community-based mental health and addiction recovery services all across the state. It means hiring back the DNR scientists and put them to work, helping us deal with both the effects of climate change and preventing climate change. And it means keeping local decisions local, because people closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. Today we're here to talk about shared revenue and local government. And we all want great communities to live in, to play in, to start a business, to great places to play, great places to go to the parks, to the art museum. But all of those services cost money. And right now, there's been a one-way street from local government to the state, where the state Republicans have taken away local powers. They've messed with all kinds of details related to Milwaukee government, and we'll hear later about the funding that they've cut. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, everybody. My name's Mike McCabe. My life's work has been exposing big money influence in politics and corruption in our government. That's what I've done for most of my adult life. And we are not going to have a government that works for all of us and not just a wealthy and well-connected and privileged few at the top, unless we deal with the fact that cronyism and corruption and what amounts to legal bribery has been allowed to take root in our state. That's a huge reason why I'm in this race for governor. But another reason I'm in this race is because of where I'm from. I'm farm raised. I grew up on a dairy farm in Clark County, about halfway between Eau Claire and Wausau. I've had the great privilege and the blessing of being able to live in the city and out in the country. And for all of the talk about the rural-urban divide and how much rural and urban populations should be at each other's throats and see each other as enemies, I am constantly struck by how much we actually have in common. How many of our concerns that Milwaukee is a drain on our state, that is an albatross for our state. And I challenge that everywhere I go, because we cannot be successful as a state if our biggest city struggles or fails. We have got to make sure that our biggest city gets its fair share of shared revenue, but we've got to make sure that our biggest city has all of its concerns addressed so that it is healthy, because our state's future depends on that. Our fates are tied. And so it is so incredibly important that we work simultaneously for urban revitalization but also rural renewal. And when we do, we can unite people who have been divided and conquered in our state.
All right. Well, thank you. So now we're going to do the show of hand statements to set a baseline. Milwaukee, the edited version, is the largest economic engine of the state. Raise your hands if you agree.
We agree with that.
It seemed like a safe one. You start easy. The best way to grow the state budget revenue is by supporting the local community's ability to invest in economic growth and create jobs. The entire state of Wisconsin benefits when the most populous county has a robust and prosperous economy.
That's absolutely true.
I see my friend County Board Chairman Thea Lipscomb is happy with your answers. And D, Milwaukee sends more in taxes to the state than it receives back relative to an appropriate level.
Total dollars.
Saw the graphs.
Yeah, the graphs are pretty compelling. All right, now, next question. The state-local government financial relationship has been under stress for several decades. Milwaukee County state aid has remained flat, while expenses for state-mandated services continue to rise. Milwaukee County officials have very limited options to raise their own revenue outside of the property tax, which is capped by the state. So the question is, how would you approach this dynamic?
But also, frankly, if you look at this metropolitan area compared to other metropolitan areas in the country, clearly the over-reliance on property tax is just huge. So obviously the state has to take a step up, their revenue and so on, be geared towards inflation, have some inflationary increases. The other thing that I think is critically important, you know, with the TIF districts and the way they work in this state, the counties and the municipalities don't really get to share in that economic growth as it is happening. We need to make sure that some of that money, it doesn't wait till the end of the rainbow when something is actually created. We need to make sure that there's money available for the counties going forward in that arena also. And of course, also, we need to make sure, this is a little weedy, but the dark store assessment where large retail outlets get a very small property tax bill because of the way we bill them across the state of Wisconsin. Dark store assessment we have to get rid of.
Thank you, Tony. Kathleen?
Chris alluded to at the beginning that in 1911, when the income tax was started, the idea was to share the revenue with local government. And that sharing simply hasn't happened. So Governor Walker's, for example, Governor Walker's payment to municipalities for shared revenue was $72 million less in 2018 than it was in 2009. You saw the graphs out there. Payments to counties have dropped since 2009, 22%. And that's not adjusted percent, 30%, which is a commitment of $415 million in the next budget. Lest ye say, oh, Kathleen, where will you come up with that money? Let me remind you, if that payment seems steep, it's less than the estimated $464 million in the first budget payment to Foxconn. Less. And I would establish a commission to completely change the way we pay shared revenue so it is based.
In one capacity or another, I've been around state or local government for close to 35 years. And I've watched the relationship between the state and local communities change dramatically over the course of that time, not just financially, but indeed, when you look at revenue sharing at the state level, our state has backed off its historic commitment to sharing revenue and making sure that local governments have the resources to meet the needs of people in their communities. But in so many other respects, that relationship has changed as well. And, you know, we have to give local officials the elbow room to operate and meet the needs of their communities. And instead, our state has put local officials in straitjackets just since 2011. Well over 130 state laws have been made taking away local decision-making authority. Local officials should have the flexibility to make decisions about what taxes to enact or levy, what's the best way to raise revenue locally. So even as the state restores its commitment to sharing state revenue with local communities should have the flexibility to make taxing decisions that go beyond just the local property tax. We have to give local communities
Existing shared revenue program in the 1970s. There was one problem that we obviously see today. It was based on population and real estate value, assessed valuation. And that worked fine until the recession in 1984. And after that, as different parts of the state saw their economies improving at different rates, things started getting out of whack. And I must say that when I returned to office in the 1990s and was raising this question of the inequity of what was going on, I'm sorry to say I turned to Milwaukee and I couldn't get any help here. But it doesn't mean we can't fix the problem now. We have to take the need portion of the formula, move it off of real estate values, and put it onto a measurement of poverty such as households that are below the poverty level. In addition, when it comes to schools, we have to principally take the majority of school funding off the property tax. That is really critical because it's a disincentive for older folks strapped with high property taxes to oppose school funding. I'll say more about this when there's more time. Thank you.
All right, the next question. The transportation budget has been a subject of considerable controversy at the state level, in a news to no one. But it's also a huge issue for Milwaukee County, which has seen transportation needs and costs increase while funding streams have not. Because the wheel tax is currently the only local revenue option available to local governments outside of the capped property tax, Milwaukee County has been forced to take on an unpopular option of increasing the wheel tax to avoid cuts to transit service that thousands rely on. The question is, are you comfortable with increased use of vehicle registration fees to support local transportation needs, or do you believe we should be looking at other options like unfreezing state aid for local transit, increasing local gas taxes or vehicle miles traveled? Would you support a policy change to allow local municipalities to implement a progressive vehicle registration fee instead of the current flat fee? And I'll start with Kathleen.
There's an imbalance between the money coming in and the money going out to transportation, which is why 20% of every, or 20 cents of every dollar goes to pay off debt. It's unsustainable, and what happened in the last budget was irresponsible. We need to increase the gas tax by a nickel. We need to index it to inflation. But there are many, many other options. The former Secretary of Transportation, the current governor's own appointee, put together a 600-page transportation budget in the last budget, not this current one, and he had 24 different issue papers in it. I read that budget, and I learned something fascinating, that we, as taxpayers, own 624 miles of freight rail line, and the freight rail does not pay a dime to go over that line. And he suggested a mere modest $10 a car fee for every car that traveled over that line so that the state was not borrowing the money to maintain the line. That's one of several options. Another option that Chris just mentioned is a progressive vehicle registration fee, which absolutely should be considered. And finally, let's talk about transit. If we compare figures adjusted for inflation since 2000, our transit budget needs to be increased 22% to stay up with inflation. And that is something that I will commit to doing. Thank you. Right on time.
You nailed it.
This is a great example of what I was just talking about. Your county has one option the state allows, and that's the wheel tax. And doggone it, we should put local communities in a position of being able to come up with better ideas. And if people are willing to agree on those better ideas, let them move forward. I said, well over 130 different laws have been made just since 2011 taking away local community decision-making authority. I've come out and gone so far as to say that all of those laws should be repealed to restore true local democracy. But then we also have to look at the pillars of current state transportation policy. It's based on the two most irresponsible options imaginable. Neglect of basic upkeep to the point where now Wisconsin's roads are rated among the nation's worst, and heavy reliance on borrowing to fund what spending is done. Those are the two most irresponsible options imaginable. We should restore inflationary adjustments to the gas tax, increase it a few pennies to ensure that revenue keeps up with inflation, and we should we should explore other options as well. I'm open to a modest tax on heavy trucks, for example. They do the most damage to the roads. I'm open to that. I am open to anything, although I'll have to say tolling is my very last and very least favorite option. But I am open to options that can enable us to pay as we pave, so that we don't have a situation as we do today where 24 cents out of every dollar you pay in gas taxes doesn't go to pave anything, it just goes for debt repayment.
One of the first things we have to do is change the existing wheel tax to an ad valorem tax, meaning that the tax will be based either on the value of the vehicle or its fuel efficiency. This is something that environmentalists and those of us working with municipal budgets have called upon the state to fix for 40 years now. We must increase the gasoline tax. There's no question about that. But the key element here is to have effective regional transit authorities with the ability to raise revenue to pay for public transit. Because the secret to this is, what are we going to do that is both environmentally and economically friendly to our communities? And effective public transit is the solution. But it will not work without capital investment from the state. It will not work with operating subsidies. And operating subsidies are good, because the more people ride on public transit, the less we invest in highways, the less we invest in the degradation of the environment, the damage that's done, everything from our lungs to what happens to the effectiveness of, I want to say, land use. And that gets me to the last point. Our great failure in Wisconsin is not tying three critical elements together: transportation policy, land use policy and the related sprawl, and tax policy. We need a governor who will bring those three together.
Well, this is clearly one of Scott Walker's biggest failures. For those of you who live in the Milwaukee area, the list of projects that are in the queue right now to be done won't be done at this rate before we redo the Marquette interchange in 70 years. And that's just what's in the queue right now. Scott Walker drew a line in the sand, said no new taxes, we're just going to borrow. As you heard clearly, that's not a workable option. He actually had a proposal in front of him, the Blue Ribbon Commission, that did recommend an increase in gas tax, did recommend money coming back to the counties for mass transit and other projects. Right now in northern Wisconsin, we have people stripping the asphalt off the roads because they can't afford to fix them. That is where we are headed as a state, gravel roads. We need to fund mass transit. And just as a side, I believe Foxconn should be funding mass transit to get workers to their alleged plant going forward. So the bottom line here is we need a good transportation policy, and we need it soon. We can no longer borrow our way out of it. Anything is on the table for me, believe me. I think the gas tax is the most reasonable approach, but I think there's cuts to what we can make in state government. I think there's tax credits are out there that are going to wealthy people that need to be looked at. Everything has to be on the table, but we need a rational policy. End of story. Thank you.
And a lot of you addressed this already, but we have a follow-up yes or no question. Would you support a policy change that increases the minimum amount of state aid for local transit and index future increases to inflation?
Yes. It needs to be done.
I figured that might be easy.
Yep.
Fourth question. Today we're in Ward 4. As I said, it's a co-location space for entrepreneurs and startups. The building, along with its venture capital fund, is committed to seeing startups in Milwaukee succeed without, again, public subsidy. So the question to each of you is, what do you believe is the role of state government to spur economic development in Milwaukee? And let's see, where are we now?
Do we start?
Yes. You guys are so polite.
I'll tell you this, crony capitalism and corporate welfare is not the way to build a sturdy economy, not in Milwaukee or not anywhere. Our state's approach of feeding the rich and showering tax breaks and state subsidies on a few at the top with the hopes that they'll somehow work magic for the rest of us has failed us for decades, and it's going to keep right on failing us. The role state government can play is to empower regular working people from the ground up. I talk everywhere I go about what I call geyser economics. Economic prosperity does not trickle down, it gushes up. And so we invest in infrastructure. We invest in decent roads and highways. And when I talk infrastructure, I'm also talking about communications infrastructure. High-speed internet everywhere. There's an awful lot of dead zones in inner-city neighborhoods, just as there are out in rural communities. And how on earth do you fully participate in a global economy, or even fully participate in modern American life without that essential 21st century tool? We put the tools in the hands of regular working people, put money in the pockets of regular working people, and they have a habit, when they get it, of spending it. They don't stash it in tax havens in Bermuda or the Cayman Islands. They don't simply pad their net worth with it. They don't take the money out of circulation.
They not only have a baseball team that won a World Series in the last decade, but they've also got the Kauffman Foundation. The Kauffman Foundation is not made up by a bunch of democratic socialists, left-wing Democrats. It's basically a conservative Republican think tank on how to build an economy and entrepreneurship. Scott Walker must have read all of their material and said, I am going to violate every principle and every rule that they have concluded from the academic and scientific research. Number one, you want to build an economy, you support local small entrepreneurs who create the most and the high-paying jobs. Number two, you do not get involved in a race to the bottom with other states in massive multi-billion-dollar handouts to foreign corporations. That's a starting point. But I go back to the 5 elements that I discussed earlier. For one thing, for an economy without affordable housing, you are not going to have a workforce. That means tax credits, not for Foxconn, but for the development of housing that is available to working people within not just Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, but the state of Wisconsin. That's a starting point. The next place we do is stop.
Good transition. Economic development clearly is a huge issue in this campaign. We need no more Hail Mary passes like Scott Walker did with Foxconn. That's going to cripple our budgets going forward. We need to return economic development, decision-making, and money to the local level. But also, I just have to, as an aside here, I'm on the Board of Regents, and I've seen the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee raised to the top as far as a Tier 1 research institution, which is absolutely important for the economy of this area. I've also seen on the Board of Regents, we're working very hard to destroy that university. There's a chemistry building on that campus. I can tell you right now, I had a better chemistry lab in Plymouth High School in 1969 than that building right now. We can't get the facilities, we can't get the money. Economic development is critical. One of the other things that I would support, frankly, is also allowing revenue limit exemptions for municipalities and counties for money that they're using for economic development. And we can define that pretty darn easily. We need to make sure that people have those opportunities going forward in the state of Wisconsin. We also have to invest in the venture fund. We have a Badger Venture Fund in the state of Wisconsin. It's hardly
economic development policy that supports the creation of all businesses. And when I look at the current policy, it's simply not sustainable. Where do you stop? Who do you choose? There's no way that the state can fund 17% of payroll for every company in the state. It just can't happen. Economists from all parts of the political spectrum say it's bad policy, it's bad economics. So what to do? Businesses locate and expand in great places to live. Places where the streets are safe, there's great schools, affordable electric rates, great parks, places where people want to live and work and play. That's where businesses locate. And what we need to do is bring the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation back under state rule so we can see that they're sitting on, last time I checked, a slush fund of $65 million, and put that to work helping our startups, helping our small and medium-sized companies, because this is where job creation happens. And we need to create the kind of what we did 100 years ago for farmers with the UW extension, the kind of outreach and assistance, whether it be finding capital, researching new production processes, new marketing opportunities, finding different ways to recruit workers, where we put the knowledge of the UW through extension to work with our businesses all across the state. Thank you.
There's a future voter.
Yes.
So, final question, and I want to thank you all for being here and your incredibly thoughtful answers. I think most people here would agree on every subject. There's probably nobody who doesn't know a little bit more now than we did before, and it's heartening to hear that from all of you. If elected, will you commit? So we could start and end that way. All right, well, thank you very much for this group, and I think, can we give them all another hand for those?
Thank you. Thank you. Good job, Paul.
All right. And with that, we'll, we'll give these folks a minute to step off and invite the next group of candidates up. Thank you, Chris. Hey, thank you.